Here we are, CNFers. Did you know that the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is sponsored by Goucher College's Master of Fine Arts in Nonfiction? It sure is. The Goucher MFA is a 2-year low residency program. Online classes let you learn from anywhere, while on-campus residencies allow you to hone your craft with accomplished mentors who have Pulitzer Prizes and best-selling books to their names. The program boasts a nationwide network of students, faculty, and alumni, which has published 140 books and counting. You'll get opportunities to meet literary agents and learn the ins and outs of the publishing journey. Visit goucher.edu/nonfiction to start your journey now. Take your writing to the next level and go from hopeful to published in Goucher's MFA program for creative nonfiction. That all sounds good, right? Let's kick it. Well, how are you, CNFers? I'm Brendan O'Mara, and this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to badass writers, filmmakers, producers, and podcasters about the art and craft of telling true stories, chart their journey through this crazy world, and offer a few tips along the way to help you get the work done. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and follow me and the show on Twitter at Brendan O'Mara and at CNFPod. You can follow the show on Instagram too, where I post some great quote cards and audiograms from the show's deep bench. If you're feeling real friendly, please leave a review over on iTunes. Ratings work as well. I'd love to see it reach 100. Just an arbitrary number. 100 sounds pretty cool. But it'll take you. It'll take you going that extra mile for your buddy B.O. You know, I love you for it. This week, I have Meredith May, at Meredith May SF across all the socials. She is the author of The Honey Bus, a memoir of loss, courage, and a girl saved by bees. If bees categorically killed Macaulay Culkin's character in My Girl, right? Isn't that what happened? Then bees saved Meredith. Anyway, speaking of love, I want to read an email I received from a listener this week. This was great. And if you want, you can email the show at creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com, and I just might read it on the air. Jeff is his name. Jeff wrote in the subject line, "Loved the Blake Harris interview." For those who aren't familiar, that's episode 143. Jeff wrote, "I learned a huge amount about him, way more than the usual, quote, tell me about the book, unquote, standard interview. Thanks for the deep dive." Well, thank you, Jeff. That was great. That's always the goal of the show. Sure, we could talk about the book, but in order to make these conversations evergreen, we here try to talk about the principles around getting the work done, so while the book might be topical, the conversation is evergreen. I love that. That was nice. Made my damn day. My week. It made my week. The Creative Nonfiction Podcast is also sponsored by Bay Path University's MFA in Creative Nonfiction. Discover your story, man. Bay Path University, founded in New England in 1897, is the first and only university to offer a no-residency, fully accredited MFA focusing exclusively on creative nonfiction. Attend full or part-time from anywhere in the world. In the Bay Path MFA, you'll find small online classes and a dynamic and supportive community. You'll master the techniques of good writing from acclaimed authors and editors, learn about publishing and teaching through professional internships, and complete a master's thesis that will form the foundation for your memoir or collection of essays. Special elective courses include contemporary women's stories, travel and food writing, family histories, spiritual writing, and an optional week-long summer residency in Ireland, with guest writers including Andre Dubus III, Anne Hood, Mia Gallagher, and others. Start dates in late August, January, and May. Find out more at baypath.edu/MFA. Okay. Whew. Okay, so Meredith May is here to talk about her career and her new book. She was at one point shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize for a long feature she wrote back around the time of the Second Iraq War for the San Francisco Chronicle. We talk about that, her book, of course, and the toxic nature of the competition Olympics, and how writing about someone else in another book cracked open her memoir for her. So here's my conversation with Meredith May. Give it up. I read it in just over 2 days, and it was just fucking amazing. I loved it. It was so damn good. Is so damn good. And you crushed it. This book is amazing.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I don't even know what to say when I hear things like that. It's just, it's this odd thing, like, you're writing a memoir, but then once you do, and once you turn it in, it's kind of like, oops, what did I just do? And then when people talk to you about it, you feel like weird. Like, how do you know that? Like, you still have that inner feeling of like, how do you know so much about me? Right. Even though you wrote the dang thing. It's this out of body experience.
It is. It's got to be, very, very weird that it's like, hold on, like, how do you know these inner secrets? And you're like, oh yeah, I kind of cracked myself open for 300 pages. Yeah,
exactly.
I think as we'll of course get to the book in detail, but I think what would be kind of fun to start out with is actually what would happen. Say your book is 321 pages. It's essentially what would be happening pages 321 through say 500, which is kind of once you broke free of your home at that point, and that's part. It's just not within the scope of this book, but it is part of the scope that led you down the road to being the writer you are and getting into journalism at school. So, how did you once you got to college, what was your path to becoming the writer you are?
Oh gosh. Okay, let's do it, because you're not the only one who said, I wanted to know what happened after you broke free of that situation. And, that's really all that stuff that happened after, exactly to your point, is what made me end up writing the book. First of all, I was always writing, even as a little kid. It was sort of one of my escapes. And, I would take my diary and I would sit in the closet with all the lights off, but I would light a candle.
Wow, like
nice. Super safe, right? But when you don't have parents paying attention to you, you get away with a lot of juicy stuff. But and I would just write in the closet, and sort of it just calmed me down. So I always, I was really geared toward becoming a writer. And my granny was always the very practical one, and she said, well, the only way writers make money is if they work for newspapers. And I thought, well, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I went to Mills College in Oakland, an all-women's school, small liberal arts school, which was really wonderful in that they did not have a journalism program per se. They had a few journalism classes, but they didn't have a major. They had a minor. And, what was actually in hindsight great about that is it forced you to think about not just, I want to be a journalist, but what do I want to write about if I'm a journalist? And I had a very wise journalism teacher who became my mentor, like all through my writing career. We stayed in touch, and I took all her journalism classes. She had, like 5. She was the journalism program. And then, what are you going to write about if you're a journalist? And I thought, that's a really good question. So, I sort of made my own major. And that's a great thing about a small school, is they let you sort of devise your own path. So I made like a journalism major, and I added a lot of internships into it. So I worked at CBS News in DC and had an internship there. And I combined all these experiences out in the world. I worked at a TV station in San Francisco, and those all really, really helped me get entry-level jobs at small newspapers, because I was very young, but I had a little bit of experience. And then I just sort of made my way up little newspapers until I finally got my dream job. Like 10 years later, the San Francisco Chronicle hired me on a probationary 2-year position, which means we'll give you a try, kid, but if you screw up, you're out. That's it, you know? And the funny thing is, I had been applying to the San Francisco Chronicle every year since I graduated from college, even though there was no opening. Okay, so I would just find out who the editor was and write this letter and send a few clips. And, you know, they must have finally I broke them down and they brought me in for an interview. And I joined newspapers at a heyday. It was 1999 when I got my job at the Chronicle, and it was a wonderful time. Newspapers had travel budgets. They had foreign bureaus. This was before a lot of the economic crashes, and I had the luxury to work on some very long stories and fly around the world writing these stories about all kinds of just amazing. I got to investigate sex trafficking between Korea and San Francisco. I wrote about a doctor from California who gave up everything after almost dying climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and went there to build a hospital, and just all sorts of really incredible experiences. The Olympics in Greece in 2004. I got to work on long form. I had an editor there who was in charge. He was called the long form editor, and he would have like maybe 2 or 3 writers under him, and his name is David Lewis, and I credit that guy with teaching me what long form was, what creative nonfiction was. I didn't know any of these terms. And he would sit down with me. I'd work on a story for maybe, I'm thinking of a couple, like I'd work on them for 6 months to a year, reporting, traveling, writing, and then sit down with David for 2 to 6 months editing and putting it into a structure with an arc and acts. He's a filmmaker. So he was teaching me how to write cinematically, and we had the luxury of time to do that. I was also at the newspaper long enough to watch all that go away. It broke my heart. So
yeah. Well, you were shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. What story was that for? What story was it?
Yeah, that's the name of it. It was a series called Operation Lionheart, and it was the second Gulf War, and it was a story about a little boy named Salah, who was he's about 9 or 10, and he picked up something in his hometown. He thought it was a toy. It was a round something, and it was some kind of explosive, and he lost his hand. He lost an eye. And the worst injury, actually, though, was the lining on his abdomen. And he almost died, but his father raced him to an Air Force base and, was screaming in Arabic. It was an American Air Force base. And there was a doctor who spoke Arabic and understood. I mean, they first thought he was a suicide bomber, which was very scary. But they worked all night, operated on the boy, and they didn't think he was going to survive. But they said to the father, "We'll try," just to give the father peace of mind that he tried. And he survived. But then there was no long-term rehab in the middle of the desert. So doctors got on the phone, and the only place that offered to take this boy for free was Children's Hospital Oakland in California. And so a photographer, actually the hospital held a press conference about this, and a photographer and I ran to the hospital, and then after the microphones and the lights were put away and they're folding up chairs, we asked if we could go visit the boy in his hospital room. I think this was before HIPAA. But we went in, and the father was there, and there was just this incredible moment where we walked in, and the father just removed the blanket. And I'll never forget it. Salah was so tiny and sick. And immediately I thought of this moment when I was a little girl and I found a little bird that had fallen out of the nest, and I lifted it up and it was just not going to make it. His body looked like that. His head looked so big and his body was so folded in. And I had to step out of the room, and I said, just a minute. And I cry all the time now, but back then I was like a little more shellacked and young and had more bravado. But I just kind of had a little mini meltdown in the hallway. And then I said, okay, we got to follow this kid. So for a year, we wrote about his recovery, his life in Oakland, California. I mean, coming from, war-torn area of the Middle East. I mean, that was really interesting, watching him adjust to school. And the story kept changing as time went on, because what happened was, back in his hometown, his mother was in danger, because people were thinking, well, why does this one boy get all this expensive American medical care? So they thought that the family were spies for the Americans. And so she had to go on the run with 2 little girls, and she was pregnant. Because people were coming after her. So she fled the country, and it was very dangerous. And we actually flew and met her at the border to follow that whole piece of the story, and then came back on the same plane with her. And it just kept changing and changing, and it was super dramatic and scary, but it was a way into the war that hadn't been, like, the war hadn't been humanized. I mean, it was when George Bush wasn't even allowing, or he got really upset when they were photographing coffins with American flags draped on them, right? Like, there was such a lockdown on that war. And so this was, like, for some people, some of the first sort of humanization they'd seen about it. So that was the story. And Deanne Fitzmaurice, the photographer, she won the Pulitzer for photography, which was so great. I mean, the lead shot of that series was Salah in the hospital room when we walked in. So we were there for a lot of his surgeries. We were in the surgery room at the time. They were removing shrapnel from his brain. People who were involved with Salah's life understood we were doing a really serious, long form look at this boy. And once they realized we weren't just in and out on a daily deadline, they'd give us incredible access. And so I was shortlisted for a Pulitzer for the writing portion, but I didn't make the final cut.
That's amazing. It's amazing to even, I mean, it stings to lose, of course, but it's also like when you kind of reframe it, it's just like you realize that just being in the conversation is kind of a victory unto itself, given, just the subjectivity of judges and everything. But were you able to process that as a victory unto itself, or were you like, shit, I want to win? Oh
gosh. At first I was like super shit. I was just so upset. Like, eat a pound of chocolate. Damn it.
Yeah, because you don't know if you're going to get another chance again. Like, that could be like, it's, you never know, but it's just like, wow, that you never know if you're going to get a story that juicy again. You're like, damn it, this is my chance, and shit.
Yeah. When I was younger than this, and, it was 2007, and to me it mattered a lot then. But I did, now I'm not in the competition Olympics anymore, and it's real easy to get into it, especially in that field where you're on daily deadlines. So you're competing with yourself, but you're competing with, the other competition, the other newspapers and the other TV stations, and now with online news as well. I mean, it's just a constant looking over your shoulder about how to get noticed and how to be first. And it's really quite crazy making. I've sort of blossomed out of that. And I feel like what really matters is not the the plaque on the wall or anything. It's that I had that experience, and it informed me as a person. And it really helped when I wrote actually my first book, which also had to do with the Middle East. It was an incredible background. And that led to another project that was even, so now I can see why things happen and what's important about them. And it's not the fleur de lis or the fancy little, cherries on the top of the sundae. It's like the sugar in the whole thing is what you want. You want the essence of the thing, not the showy tree topper,
Yeah. It's amazing that it's actually really great that you were able to blossom out of that toxic competitiveness before like social media really took hold. Because that seems to be a force multiplier of jealousy and competition, because it just feels like everyone's winning and you're just wallowing in shit. And,
and it's so easy to lie about your winning, with not being checked.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like it's when you were thinking back to those times, and probably even today to some extent, like what is your relationship to competitiveness and even jealousy and looking over your shoulder? Like how have you learned to deal with that?
I guess I've learned the hard way that what you think of as failures or disappointments are not actually that literal. What they are very important pauses in how you think about things. Because I've had more experiences with failure, and then years later I understand why it wasn't the right moment at the time for me to get what I wanted. Either I would not have appreciated it, I wouldn't have understood it, or I wouldn't have used it for good. I would have used it for my own ego. I can give you an example of that would make this sound less esoteric. And that is the memoir that's coming out now took me 10 years almost to get to this point. And I had so much rejection with it. And I love talking about it because I think when people see the pretty book and the cover is so pretty, I love it.
It is. Yeah, it really is.
They just see it and it's shiny and yellow and glowing like an ore, and everything's happy about it. But it was a lot of, I didn't know how to write memoir, obviously. It was just so much no. And that's what is the amazing thing about that it even exists, is that I somehow was able to navigate everyone telling me this isn't going to work. This isn't good. I mean, beyond just my inner monkey monologue, what happened is the first version almost sold. The first version was you really just I'm mad at my parents memoir. And so a lot of it was, the chapters were like exhibit A, B, C, D. These are all scenes of things, mostly my mother, but my parents did, that are awful. And isn't this dramatic, like Glass Castle? And shouldn't you love me for telling you? And shouldn't you also feel my pain? I mean, I was so in love with my victimhood that, I thought that's all I had to do was tell you about these awful things. And you'd say, oh, honey, please come here. Let me give you a hug. And I needed to do that. It was therapeutic. It was part of why, that is a part of why I write them out. Of course, every memoir's got, something, but it's not that interesting, right? On some level, we're all sort of pissed off at our parents, so why do you want to read about someone else who is too, right? That was the first version. And there were about a dozen, my agent sent it to about a dozen editors, and there were a couple of nibbles, but no bites. That was another one of my moments in my career where I had to have a whole day full of chocolate. 6 months later, one of the nibbles came flying back in with an offer, but had nothing to do with my book. And This was, they wanted a ghostwriter for this other story. It was a story of an Iranian child. This is my first book, called I Who Did Not Die. So this was a story of an Iranian child soldier who was supposed to kill, he had orders to kill anyone he found in an underground bunker. This was after a battle, and this was the first Gulf War. And he found nobody alive except for one guy, and he couldn't bring himself to shoot him. And so he hid him behind, he made a wall of dead bodies, hid him behind it, and nursed him back to health over 3 days. And then they both went their separate ways. They're both captured, both prisoners of war. The injured guy was 17 years in prison. And then, spoiler alert, if anyone wants to hit pause, but this is why the book is interesting. 20 years later, they sat down next to each other in a center for torture survivors in Vancouver, Canada. And yeah, the reason they were there is the Iranian had PTSD and he had just tried to commit suicide. The Iraqi was dropping his father off, but they didn't even know it. They lived 20 minutes apart. They had never known each other's name. And in this beautiful way, the Iraqi got to return the favor and save the little kid who saved him. And now they're brothers. They see each other all the time. The Iranian felt like he had a reason to live again. He's never been suicidal since. This is an amazing story that I was perfectly positioned to write because, well, I needed a job and I was really sad my book didn't get picked up. But I felt like I understood a little bit about that part of the world, having done the other newspaper story. I was Operation Lionheart, and I understood a little Arabic. I had been to that part of the world. And so I flew to Canada to meet the men and brought copies of the Chronicle article with me and showed them, and they, especially the Iraqi man started crying because he just recognized that in himself. So it was amazing that I did not win the Pulitzer Prize, yet that book unlocked the door and got these men to trust me because they had been approached and they, especially the Iraqi, was not wanting to talk, but that story unlocked him for me. So that led to that book. And then once I wrote the book, I did it. I wrote it as a memoir. I used I and me, but I was writing as the men, and the chapters alternate from their points of view. So it's like Iranian, Iraqi. Mm-hmm. Once I had done that, then I picked up my manuscript again in my memoir, and I knew immediately what was wrong with it because I was able to write someone else's story because that's what I do. That's what but I couldn't write my own until I had had that experience and understood why mine wasn't working. Because I wasn't writing with interior monologue and reflection and honesty, and I wasn't going all the way with it. I was still being protecting myself. But when I'm doing it for someone else, it's their story. So I don't know. I'm more open, more free. So all of that failure helped me finally get where I wanted to be. But I wouldn't have done it, I don't think. If one of those early editors had said yes, I would have been so happy, but I would have been so ashamed of that book if it had been published the way I'd written it originally.
Yeah. So when you were able to approach the memoir again after having done that other book experience, what was the main change? Where did you direct your focus versus that initial draft that was more cathartic for you to write, but ultimately not great for a reader?
Writing the men's stories made me realize is that a book needs a higher purpose. A story needs a higher purpose beyond just, it's my story and isn't it interesting? Or it's my story and I want to write it, so I'm going to make you read it. There's got to be something the reader is going to get out of it. I mean, the pleasure of reading a book is that it's reciprocal. And I didn't have any reciprocity in my first version. And what I realized is I had been focusing on the negative with my book. I'd been focusing on what was missing from my life and what a survivor I was, right? For getting through all this without having, a stable platform. But what I wasn't writing was I was saved in the most amazing way by my grandfather and his honeybees. And the connection between the dysfunction in my family and then the uber function of a bee colony is what pulled me through it. And that is really interesting. So as soon as I realized that and focused on that, how nature can be in some ways a parent, it became really, really unusual and quirky and cool and deep and fun and surprising and uplifting. And that's something that's the paycheck for the reader and me too, writing it. Once I moved on beyond my childhood was cursed to actually was quite blessed, I became an even happier person.
Was like your first draft, did that not even touch the honey bust and your grandfather and the bees at all?
Yeah, they were there like spice in the recipe. They were popping in and out as kind of cool creatures, but no, I had not made the connection metaphorically between bee society and a family society, like the social living of bees and what you can learn about how to be a good person by watching them. I hadn't made those connections yet. I actually, I started writing the book in my MFA program at Goucher College and I didn't get bees again as an adult until 2011 when I put 2 beehives on the roof of the San Francisco Chronicle. And so I really had, I wasn't mature enough about bees and about my own processing of my own childhood to write the book that's out now. So I really started this memoir before I think I was emotionally ready for it. And that's another reason why it took so long.
Did you see this video of a little dachshund in the whole bee garb makeup with the screen, the veil and everything to sniff out like bad hives before it can take over an entire colony?
Yes, I did. And that's like 6 years ago, there was one that was like a chocolate lab in a bee suit, like a dog bee suit. I mean, it's not like it just happened, but I guess it's making the rounds again on social media because I don't know, like the suit's cuter because it's smaller. But yes, dogs can smell foul brood and other diseases because and I mean, you and I can smell it too, I guess, but I guess they can catch it before we catch it. It is stinky. It smells like rotting meat because what happens is the larva, when the hive gets it, the larva liquefies in the cells. So before it, so it obviously doesn't emerge and it just kind of, it rots back there. But yeah.
Yeah. Of all the cool things that bees are capable of, it makes me think to like Cy Montgomery's book, The Soul of an Octopus, too. Like,
love her. She blurbed my book too. I was so
wonderful.
Excited.
She's great. I've she's been on the show, and when she came to Eugene on tour on another like speaking round, I actually met her here and just hung out and had lunch with her, and yeah, she's amazing.
Oh my gosh, I'm so jelly. Yeah, that I'll never forget in her Soul of an Octopus that octopuses, it's not octopi, that's the first thing I remember. Mm-hmm. They hug you. When they get to know you and don't see you for a while, you come back, they like reach their arms out and put their suckers on you. And
They change color depending on their emotions. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's this mollusk, and no one ever thought of like something of that nature would have some sort of consciousness, and so that made me think of the bees too, in the way that you don't think of an insect having that kind of higher level thinking, and they totally, after you read your book, and you realize that they have all these complex dynamics. I'm sure a lot of people know that they dance, but there are so many other things that they do to make the collective greater.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was very careful to try to put things in the book that only a beekeeper sees, because it's so easy to slip into cliche when you talk about bees and industriousness and, busy as a bee. And the dancing is pretty common, although you can't write a book about bees without mentioning that they dance. But
right.
I was trying to, pick things that kind of blow my mind, that you never hear about or see, that do make you go, huh, are they thinking about that? Grandpa and I were working the hives, and it started to rain, and bees hate bad weather. They stay inside unless it's like nice and sunny and no wind. And it started to rain, and one of the frames covered with bees was on the ground, and it'd been out there for a while, and it started to rain. So we were putting all the frames. A hive box has either 8 or 10 wooden hanging frames in them, and the frames have the honeycomb. And so we were putting them back together, and then we looked over at the one that was still on the ground, and the bees had aligned themselves all like in military precision, all in rows, all facing the same direction, and they'd locked their wings together like Spanish roof tiles, and they were making an umbrella over the nursery, like protecting the eggs from the rain. And it was just like, what are they doing? How'd they know to do that? How did they know to do it so quickly? And how did they all get in the same formation when we had our heads turned for a second?
Yeah.
It was so wild. And then the loving thing about it is that they were putting themselves, in the way of the rain. They knew enough that like the eggs needed more protection than they did. They were more precious than them. And, how long would they have stayed like that? 'Cause I don't know if they would have made it, right, if we left them out that way. So they were willing to die for their babies, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. Another thing, too, just, the entomology of these, of the bees is when the queen is dying and they decide to make, through their various processes, turn a larva basically into a queen. And then there are several queens, and then the queens go on a killing spree to kill the other queens. Like it's just like you think of these things as these like beautiful like communes, but then it can get downright ruthless too.
Oh, for sure. And the queen is the only bee that can sting repeatedly in the hive. The males don't have stingers. And then the worker bee females have barbed stingers. So when they sting, the stinger pulls out and they die. But that's why the queen has a smooth stinger, is because if she ever needs to like kick some ass in the hive.
Hey, what is the meaning of this? Well, I want to say that this episode is also brought to you by my monthly newsletter. Oh yeah, that's right. On the first of the month, you can get a tasty bit of goodness sent right to your inbox. My reading recommendations for the month and what you might have missed from the world of the podcast. Visit BrendanO'Mara.com. Once a month, no spam, can't beat it. Now back to the show. When you were writing this book and you were getting, and the focus it went more to your grandfather and to the bees, and then I wonder, especially at this point, like you are when you moved out to California from Rhode Island, your grandfather was rough in his low 50s. I think it might have been, if I'm remembering right, about 51 or so. And now, like, you're not 50, but you're about the same age as your grandfather was when you moved out there in the mid 70s. Did
Yes.
that ever like cross your mind, as like as you're approaching his age when you really started to live with him? You're like, oh wow, this is like this kind of weird, weird connection. Can you imagine what it must have been like for him? Basically being the same age as you are now. Getting this new brood, like coming to his
Yeah.
house, and that kind of connection. Did that ever sort of like just joggle around in your head as you were writing it?
Oh, yeah. That about 2 years ago, that started clicking with me. And it was a beautiful time to click because that was helping me in like the last few miles of the marathon with this book, because I could write about him in a way that was so much more compassionate and understanding of what he might have been going through. But really, what it helped me understand is figure out which moments and conversations to include in the book that we had, because now I can see what he was doing. Like he would just be talking to me about, I'll give you an example, scout bees and what they do. And up until I got to be about his age and realize, wow, what would that be like to have a 5 or 6 year old just suddenly wander into my life, and not even know that she needs help, or guidance, and how would I, and I'm not biologically her, grandfather, I'm her step grandfather. And, he had to sort of tiptoe around my really volatile mother and his wife, who was like my mother's bouncer, so he had to help me without them really noticing and sort of take charge without looking like it. So that's why a lot of our conversations happened inside the old World War II Army bus that served as his honey house in the backyard. And, he, going back to the scout bees, like he would just tell me what scout bees do. And scout bees are the ones that leave the hive when there's something wrong with their house. It's too crowded or too drafty or too damp. And then they'll start scouting the neighborhood for a new place to move to swarm to. And so he would talk to me about how, sometimes your house isn't the best house for you, and you need to go out and look for a new one. And he was explaining to me what scouts do as if we're just having a little conversation about these really cool bees.
Yeah.
But it's lodging somewhere in my brain. What he was doing was giving me a sense of initiative, and nothing comes unless you go out and get it yourself. And that sometimes your situation is not great, but if you can make it better, if you're patient and work hard, all those lessons are like somehow bubbling in my brain. And it's not until I'm his age and I'm like, wait a minute, that's what he was doing. And then that helped me figure out what the scenes need to be in the book, and to do them in a way that makes the reader feel like they're figuring it out as well, because I'm also figuring it out in live time. And it made it a more multifaceted book with a lot of layers to it. And that's what I mean when I was trying to pick bee moments that are significant. One, just in terms of the cool things bees do that you might not have heard about, but also significant in how they can also apply to humanity and to helping a kid.
Yeah, I imagine it was probably hard for you as the writer of this not to be heavy-handed with the bee metaphors, because if you didn't handle them as well as you did, it would just be like, okay, that's, of course, that's very obvious. But the way you handled it with such great subtlety that, I could pick it up. Like when he was talking about the scalpies, I'm like, oh, okay, this is him talking in code, telling his granddaughter whom he loves so much, but he can't like meddle too much, but he can speak this other little language about scouts and be like, you know what, you need to start considering, because no one's given you permission to even consider a life outside
Mm-hmm.
Carmel Valley and
Mm-hmm.
and that very sort of that toxic atmosphere. And he's like telling you, through these that, you do have to start exploring and considering a life away from this hive, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, he was the only one who would ask, well, what are you going to do after this? And, it kind of didn't occur to me that, oh, I don't get to live with grandpa forever. There are things out there beyond that he was just kind of scratching me to start thinking about. And, he was always the one who was outdoors. He was down way in some remote canyon in Big Sur. And um, my mother and my grandmother were in the house all the time. And there was just this huge difference in the way the two lived. And I really appreciated Grandpa for taking me out and taking me around and giving me a sense of there's something out there. There's a really beautiful places out there and adventure out there. And you don't have to stay here if you don't want to.
Another part of the book that I found, of course, very touching is the relationship you have with your brother. You two are just like, bound in the circumstances that you were raised. And I'm trying to tiptoe around the things in the book too, because I don't want to give too much away about the circumstances under which you grew up. But how did you bond with your brother, and how did that relationship really galvanize, given where you guys came from?
Yeah, Matthew and I mean, when I'm just smiling right now, like when I think of my brother and, um, we, we were we were obviously the only ones having this very unique experience, but, um, we kept each other company. And, I think as we got older, I'm struggling a little bit because we have very different personalities and reacted in very different ways to what was going on. My brother became very quiet, and also because uh, he was living. He was not in the house as much as I was. I'm trying not to reveal too. I'm figuring out,
Yeah,
but
right.
I'll just say, yeah, one of the things, he lived in a trailer on the property. My grandmother's wisdom, she thought that would be a good idea. And this little kid in this very cold night trailer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I I was in the house. I was in my mom's orbit a lot. I was sort of the focus of my mother's disappointment. And I was sort of the buffer between her and my brother. So he retracted. He deals with it by closing up. And I dealt with it by being an oversharer, an overachiever, like constantly on the run. And I had lots of little friends. And I would just be super charming and get invited for dinners and sleepovers. And I had like toothbrushes scattered all over Carmel Valley. And that's how I was always gone, and that's how I dealt with it. So we're very different. But as we've gotten older and started sort of talking to each other, especially when I started writing the book, I would say, do you remember when? Or, and he's read a lot of the passages in it. And our grandpa, granny, and mom all passed away between 2015 and 2017. So in dealing with that, we've come together more. And so now that the book has really done this lovely thing where it sort of cracked him open a little bit, and he will start talking. I'm very gentle with him because he was only 2 when all of this happened. So it affected him in a very different way than it did me, even though it was only a 2-year difference. And he's very shut down, but he's also very funny. And we use humor a lot to try to process things that happen to us. So we will retell the stories in a funny way, or he'll make a joke about the way my mother said something or did something, and how outrageous it was. And that helps. That really, really helps. And so that's one of the lovely things I like about this book, is that I think it's helping my brother in a lovely way. He works at Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And then, this is someone he knows really well as a work friend. But then the next day, the work friend said, "We got to go to lunch. We got to talk. Are you okay?" And honestly, my brother told it in a way that was like, he was impressed that someone would care that much about him and wanted to talk to him and sort of have a little mini therapy lunch with him. Like, he was embarrassed by it, but I could tell he felt loved by it. And I like that the book is doing that for him, and maybe it might help him. I also feel a little bad because, I put his business out there. That's the sort of the deal with memoir is, you sometimes when you're in one, you never asked to be in it. So I did, it honestly didn't dawn on me that in the same way that readers are talking to me about private stuff in my family, and I find it strange, even though I wrote the dang thing, it's also going to happen to my brother. Yeah, but he's really cool and supportive, and he read a copy before it came out. I was worried that he would disagree with how I remembered things, or wish that I hadn't written things. And the only thing that he wanted me to change was some information about airplanes I got wrong. He's a pilot, like just technical things like that. Something I got wrong about the odometer on the truck. And
what scared you the most about writing this book?
Oh my gosh, I got to pick one.
Yeah.
My father, actually, my
Mm-hmm.
father. Yeah. Because, he's not in the book very much because he wasn't physically there, but he is very much in my longing for him. And I worried that, well, I know he's very sensitive and feels very bad about the way things turned out, and that he wasn't there for our growing up. I'm close with my dad now, and I was off and on growing up, but I just worried that he would be seen as a villain by other people because, people would say woulda, coulda, shoulda. What happened is my dad remarried about 5 or 6 years after the divorce, and started another family and had 2 sons, and we're all very close. I just worried people would criticize him, and it was hard. He helped me. I had foggy memories of living with him. I do remember the really volatile stuff. I remember dishes flying through the air. I remember just the sound of my mother's voice at a very high pitch. I remember him playing the Beatles. I remember things, and I remember certain moments. But I would run by what I remembered with him, and he would say, "That's about right," but also this happened, or no, it was like this, but he could only go for about 15 minutes at a time. And then he'd start going, duh, I don't remember. It was just bad. I don't remember. It was just bad. I don't know. I don't know, And so I had to just really delicately approach him. I found out he was much easier with it if it was over Facebook Messenger. That's his preferred way of talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
But so, and my fears so far have been wrong. I mean, he read the book before it came out, and he said, that he really liked it. It made him cry, but he loved it. And he said, you got your mom spot on. I don't know how you remember those sentences, but anyway.
Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack when you have to kind of interview a parent, especially if there's very sensitive matters. And I've had
Yeah.
that problem of late, and I'm on a 10-year memoir myself, and so it's been it's a challenge because the questions almost always come across as judgmental. Whereas, you and I were journalists, but we're just asking questions to get the information. But if you say like, "Oh, why did this happen? What were you thinking?" They're immediately
Mm-hmm.
hackles go up,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
so maybe that's why Facebook Messenger kind of worked. You can kind of temper it a little bit versus the phone. Yeah, how did you navigate those tricky questions with your dad that are incredibly sensitive?
Yeah, I think yeah, your approach that you mentioned works really well. Like, help me remember this. I have a sketchy memory. Is this how this happened? Or,
That's a great
but,
point. Yeah.
like that, that helped. I think, I was kind of sneaky now that I think about it. Like in the beginning of this process, when I was just, when I was at Goucher, that's where I wrote my first sentence of this book was at Goucher. It was so funny because I came without anything to share in workshop, and Tom French said, "Okay, on the first day, everybody come back to next class with 10 pages to workshop." And I'm like, "Workshop? Isn't that a noun? Like, what does he mean, workshop?" I was so naive. And then when someone explained it to me, oh, great, I guess what I'm doing tonight. And I just started like writing this memoir. And so in the beginning, I was fumbling along, and when I wasn't sure if this was ever going to be a book. I didn't even understand how books got made. I didn't know what an agent was. I was really, really naive.
That
But
surprises me, given your
I
track
know.
record as a reporter. It's just in writing long form stuff that is probably almost book length. That just I'm not calling you an idiot by any stretch. I just that kind
No,
of surprises me.
yeah, I was just really focused on journalism. And, you know, I, I, I really like when uh, Goucher was wonderful because they do that senior trip. I don't know if they do it anymore, but they take you to publishing houses, and you meet with agents and you pitch your book right there, and that blew my mind. I'm like, oh, this is where books get made. Really,
Yeah, yeah.
but wait, I'm trying to answer what your question was about. Oh, so in the beginning, I wanted information from my dad, but I was so scared that he would not want me writing a book about it that I didn't tell him I was working on a book. I'd just be like, "So, Dad, remember that time?" And I could tell he was always like, "Why is she always bringing this stuff up?" Um, so I was a little sneaky about it, I think, or maybe I wasn't sneaky. I just thought I was, but I was terrified that he wouldn't approve of what I was doing. And I think, another tactic I would use. He's a photographer, and he has all these old Kodachrome slides, and I'd want to see what he had of my childhood, and that always sparked conversation. Like, what am I doing there? Where was that taken? What's Mom doing? Why did we go here? And that was another sneaky poo way for me to get some intel. And then, I think a couple of years into it, when I finally got an agent, and she was starting to send the book around, that's when I said, "Dad, I'm working on a book." I thought, okay, I wasn't going to tell him unless it was starting to actually happen, and then I should say starting to actually maybe happen. Then I told him, and he was like, "Yeah, oh," I think he already knew.
Mm.
But yeah, I share with you that, like, it's weird, this terror we have of hurting our parents, or what they're going to think, even when we're adults ourselves. I don't. It's bizarre, but it's there. It's a real thing. The interesting thing about memoir is, for me is, I'm not exactly sure while I'm doing it why I'm doing it, or what the larger thing, or what it's about. You just need to do it, right?
Yeah,
It's an uncontrollable thing.
for sure.
And then after you write it, people tell you what your memoir is about. And
Hmm.
you're like, oh, okay. And, sometimes it's on and sometimes it's off, but that's been a really interesting, rewarding part of it, is to see, especially when people write like reviews on Goodreads, or, and they sort of analyze your book and talk about what the themes are. And you're like, okay, now I get what my book, people sort of reflect back to you their experience and how they've absorbed their book based on their history, and they find their parallels with your story and then give them back to you, and you feel less weird in the process, and they feel less weird because they've been able to connect in some way with you. And you're right, it doesn't matter if the characters' names are, it doesn't at all, really. So yeah, I think people get pretty hyped up about memoir and being exposed, but there's a certain invisibility in being exposed. When your story can hit someone universally.
Hmm. Yeah, and when I was reading Liz Gilbert's Big Magic, and it's a book I reread every now and again, there's a part in there where a woman who read Eat, Pray, Love came up to Liz at a reading or a signing or whatever and said, "Oh, when you experienced this in the story, it made me feel less alone." And then, like, Liz writing later, she's like, that never happened in the book. It just straight up did not happen to me. But that woman projected a certain experience onto Eat, Pray, Love that really helped her, and that's great. It's the perfect illustration of, like, when the memoir is really humming, it's really not about the writer anymore. It's about the
No.
reader.
Oh, that is so funny. Yeah, I'm thinking somebody said something about my book that my mother was a raging alcoholic, and there's even like a section in the book where I wished she were, because that would explain
It
her
would explain
behavior.
some things. Yeah, you itemize things like classic excuses for her behavior, and there are no there. She checks none of those boxes. It just comes back to one, her incredibly abusive childhood, and I don't know. I hope that's not a spoiler, but I think
Mm-mm.
that's ultimately the violent, her inner rage and her inability to love, it
Mm-hmm.
stemmed from that. So, but it has, yeah, she doesn't check any of the drug abuser, alcoholic boxes at all. It just came from that.
Yeah, and she was a fascinating and a complex woman, and therefore she was difficult to write about as a character, because her main transgression was that she didn't do anything. And so how do you write about a character who's not moving or acting in any scene? So that was actually one of my difficulties, was trying to figure out how to make her a presence in the book when she's like asleep for
Mm. I
most
think
of those years.
I think you totally nailed it, because I felt her presence throughout the whole thing. Like, there was a bad queen bee here that was not bad in the sense, like, evil, but just like
Failing, but failing.
but
Yeah.
failing, because she was definitely, had you not had a sort of cryptic scout bee conversation with, quite literally, your mom would, like, pull you into her, and she would have
Mm-hmm.
inevitably pulled you down with her if you didn't have an escape hatch. And
Mm.
you felt, I know I felt that presence of her, and how close you can get to her without getting too close, and how much can you talk to her without saying too much or with the wrong tone.
Mm.
You navigated that incredibly well, so you feel that presence throughout the whole thing.
I think what really works is, and my editor and my agent both helped me with this a lot, because in the early versions she was very two-dimensional. What helps is writing about your emotions in relation to her, and your constant that fear of what's she gonna do now, and then write about the moments where she does something really great, which is so freaky And like, oh, why is she being nice? You know,
Right.
just sort of the reaction to it. And also I wanted a little bit of humor, even if it's dark humor. Like there's a scene where, I mean, she used to do some wacky things, like she would purposely go to garage sales in rich neighborhoods and then come up with lies to get herself in the house. Like she had to pee or whatever, or she wanted to check a piece of art or look at those stained glass windows because she was thinking of getting the same kind in her chateau. And just so she could snoop. And,
Yeah.
you know, and they're darkly funny, but they're also incredibly sad because you can see the wishing for what could have been. And it's, you know, it's a way of humor is how my brother and I deal with things, but it's a way of trying to skate over the top of a really big hurt. So I think those kind of things worked really well as scenes. So I had to spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, it's not Mommy Dearest. It's not like, you know, Glass Castle. She's not like rip roaring through every scene, but she's just doing things that have an edge to them, and they can be small like that, and still be really powerful. My mother was the role reversal. You know, she forced me and my brother, and actually anyone who came in her orbit, to parent her.
Right.
And it was just a really confusing thing as a kid, and where the mom needs comfort that she can never get, and you know, she doesn't even see her child as a child. This is someone who needs to help her right now get through something she can only get through on her own, and just unable to keep these things from their kids. You know, it's just like your kids are tools, not things to protect. They're tools for you. Yeah, that was a constant theme, you know, that you know, life's so easy for you, you know, you're thin, you're tall like your dad. And like my mother always struggled with her weight. And so like these little like biting asides would come out a lot, that were super hard to deal with. But you know, you can get really sort of bogged down in what you didn't have. And you know, in certain ways, having difficulty as a little kid, like really kind of made me bold, you know, as a youngster, and not afraid, because you've already had so much fear and so much scary in your life, that things that are supposed to scare you don't, you know. And it makes you go out and try things. And I think, you know, journalism, when they, you know, you get sent into a new country, maybe there's a war going on, figure this out, find out who to interview, be careful you don't get shot, you know, like you know, you move through the world with a boldness that brings you also a lot of great experience and great joy. And you know, maybe I wouldn't have taken as many risks had I not had like no scaffolding under me as a little kid. You know, I walked away from my job at the Chronicle to try to write some books, and I didn't have a plan B. Maybe I wouldn't have done that, you know, had I not been comfortable with being on shaky ground. Right. So there's all sorts of things I wonder about. You know, I feel like I've gotten my life in a place where it's really rewarding right now, but I had to go through a lot of muck and take a lot of risks. And I'm just now feel like super grateful for everything. You know, I'm so happy that this book really is like a love letter to my grandfather, and he's such an amazing person, and now he's in print, and so in a way he's like not really dead, and other people get to experience him. And you know, and people in other countries, like 11 countries have picked up this book. I mean, think of people in South Korea reading about Grandpa in Big Sur. It just, it's like it gives him immortality. And that was worth it. Like that was worth everything for someone like him to be honored like long after I'm gone and long into the future is just super, super great.
Yeah, he's such a wonderful, warm presence in this book, and much needed ballast to everything else that was going on around you. And I think one of my favorite moments in this book was the sort of bring your father to work day. And
Yes.
I love that part so much because you had just learned that he was your step grandfather and not technically your real grandpa.
Yeah.
And so you were worried that he was going to be too old and too dorky or nerdy, and then he just
Yeah.
blew the class away, and you're like, yeah, that's my grandpa.
I know. He was like, drop the mic. I mean, it was so, I'll never forget that because, he's scruffy and he's always got like plumber's putty drip down his shirt and his Levi's are sagging off his butt. And, I'm like, take your dad to work day. Okay. Grandpa doesn't really even work. He just fixes things. He fixes toilets and he goes and checks the bees. And he makes honey. Like he doesn't really have a job. In my mind,
Right.
That wasn't a workplace. And I thought, oh, great. I'm already like, I was having a hard time fitting in school and probably because an odd kid, but kids could sense that something was different about me. And being raised by grandparents, at least at that time in that area of California, was unusual in the 70s in Carmel Valley. It wasn't as common as it is now. But all he did is get up there and start talking about putting his bare hands in a beehive and chasing swarms and partying at Nepenthe with Henry Miller, and everybody was like, what?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah. Yeah. Did he know, did a parent ask about Kerouac too? Am I remembering that right? Or is it another author?
No, let's see. He asked about Henry Miller and someone said, did you know Henry Miller? Oh no, Steinbeck.
Steinbeck. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, Grandpa played ping pong with Henry Miller and Nepenthe, but no, Steinbeck, it was so amazing because later John Steinbeck was in Cannery Row in Monterey and in the area writing those books at that time. And so it's required reading at Carmel High School and Carmel Middle School, all Steinbeck. And I remember I was reading Cannery Row and telling Grandpa at the dinner table about this great book I'm reading. And yeah, there's, these characters and there's this, and I was telling him about the marine biologist in the lab, and Grandpa was like, oh yeah, that's Doc Ricketts. And, we go catch frogs out of the Carmel Valley River and we get like 10 cents a piece for his lab. And, and there's a section in the book where there are homeless men living in the Del Monte forest. And what they're living in are like, there would be fires at the cannery, the sardine canneries. And afterwards, people would throw like broken pieces of equipment or burned out pieces of the sardine equipment, the chutes and stuff, the metal chutes, into the forest. And so in the book Steinbeck talks about hobos who are living in these little lean-to shelters made out of old burned sardine factory equipment. And Grandpa's, oh yeah. And he was like, he called them the hobos. Yeah, the hobos in the forest. Yeah, and he knew them by name and he brought them honey. And I was like, what? I just remember my jaw dropping. Like Grandpa was talking about people in my book, and my book was supposedly fiction, and I was like so confused. But
it just added to this myth, making your grandfather that much more of this mythic figure in the book. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
It was awesome.
He used to be called the beekeeper of Big Sur, and he is mythic in that area along the coast. And I'll give you an example. Like, all I have to do is say, whenever I meet anybody in Big Sur, they say, oh, what's your name? Nice to meet you. I say, well, you might know my grandfather. And I say, Franklin Peace. And then they are like, he's your grandfather? Oh my God. And they'll go on and on and on and tell me this story about one time a Volkswagen Bug ran off the road and rolled into a field, and the couple inside got out screaming at each other, and they were having a fight, and that's why they crashed. And my grandpa was on a porch across the street and ran over to them and did an impromptu therapy session, got him to kiss and make up, and then got a winch and pulled their car out and got him back on the road. Like, I'm like, I'm not making this up. It's amazing. And I was walking along Highway 1 going to brunch one day, and I was with two friends who lived down there. And there was a PG&E worker working on a pole. And they said, hey, Joe, they knew each other. They were talking. And then, hey, Joe, this is Meredith. Nice to meet you. And then they said, no, she's Frank Peace's granddaughter. And he takes his hard hat and he throws it to the ground, and he's like, this really bear hug, boom, like this burly guy. And I'm like, okay, we hug now, and grandpa just has that, I don't know, that like magic glue. He just disarms people, and he's so pure. He doesn't give a fig about money or power or rank or anything. He is just there. And I learned after he passed that he had all these private relationships with people, and nobody knew about each other. They all thought they were like grandpa's best friend. And they just came out of the woodwork afterwards and told me how much he meant to them. And I don't know when he had the time to do all this, because I thought he was with me the whole time, right? So he's my role model. I try to be like him a lot. And, when I say, not getting into the competition Olympics about writing and how well is my book doing and blah, 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 I think, okay, how much is that important versus when you die having a legacy like that? That's where I try to stay when I feel myself kind of getting off balance.
Mm. And, with that in mind, trying to live up to that example, what have you put into practice so that, you can similarly make a similar impact on the world and other people's lives, in your orbit?
That's a really good question. I try to be super generous and super giving, and and it's hard, because it takes a lot of time to get a career off the ground, and you have to be kind of focused on yourself and self-promotional, and we were talking about social media. So I find myself doing too much of that, and it feels icky. So I try to just really stop and maintain my relationships and call my friends and see them, or I do popovers, or I call them on the phone, and I try to do the old-fashioned, I'm coming over, I've got the dog, let's play with the puppy and have some tea, and just like pull people back to human interaction. That's what I'm working on. I also have a special relationship with a girl that, well, she's not a girl anymore, but when I met her when I was a reporter early starting, and she had a really difficult home life. She lived in Richmond, California, in a federal housing project. It was very dangerous, crime-ridden kind of situation. And I sort of saw myself in her. She's this spark in this very large family with not a lot of adult attention. And so I just started mentoring her, and we've maintained that relationship now. And so that, I think my grandfather's, without me knowing it, inspired me to kind of take a step and reach out to her. And that's become a really lovely thing, because now she teaches me more than I teach her about life. And so that's one other thing. I mean, I don't even like saying that's one thing I do, because it sounds like it's a task or a project, but that's a friendship. I brought into my life without really needing to talk a lot about it to other people. And so that's special.
Yeah,
She's
just like
really
your
made my
grandpa.
life so much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this is really exciting. As part of the book tour, I'm going to my elementary school, and I'm going to talk to the kids about bees and show them bees, and just see if I can get them excited about that. So that's kind of cool. I sort of have this vision of the future of getting an old bus and like driving it to schools and having an observation hive and showing them how to make honey and doing kind of like the bookmobile, but like the bee mobile.
Oh, you gotta do
Right?
that.
Doesn't
Yeah.
that sound good?
Yeah. You're the crazy bee lady of San Francisco.
Totally. I will wear that cloak. Yes.
Well, let me ask you one last thing, Meredith, before I let you go. You've been incredibly generous with your time, and it's been a ton of fun for me to talk with you for such an extended period of time.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So the last thing I got to ask you about your puppy. What's going on with the puppy? What's that been like since you brought her into your life?
Well, yeah, right in the middle of a book coming out, we throw a puppy bomb. But yes, yes. Her name is Edith. She's a golden retriever, and her full name is Edie Mae Jackson, which is a nice Southern name, and it's fun to yell down the beach. She's great. She's almost 6 months, and she just finished Puppy 2 class yesterday night. So she can sit and lay down, and she's got 60% recall. But no, I mean, we're like the ridiculous, childless, over parenting, dog owners, and she's got several beds in the house and toy boxes and filet mignon freeze-dried treats. It's just silly. We're just spoiling the crap out of her. She's a little timid though. She's afraid to go on walks. She kind of freezes if there's a car or a barking dog or an umbrella or a bird or a shadow or a kid or it's like, oh. So we're trying to figure out ways to get her calm and, teach her that we're going to protect her and she can try and take a step. So yeah, we're getting some special education classes set up for them.
Oh.
Yeah, she's her own being. She's my third golden retriever, and she's got her own little mind about things. But she's a ton of fun.
Awesome. And where can people get more familiar with your work, Meredith? Online, social media, website, and everything, so they can get more familiar with the book and other things you've done.
Yeah, the website is thehoneybus.com, and I'm on Twitter at Meredith May SF, and Instagram is the same, and Facebook is also the same.
Fantastic. Well, Meredith, thank you so much for carving out the time and, of course, writing this wonderful memoir that I can't recommend enough. So it's I wish you great success with it, and we'll have to have another one of these conversations sometime down the road.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you so much. It's been a ton of fun.
Excellent. All right. Well, take care, and we'll be in touch. Don't you want to get a hive of bees now? Me and the missus want to put hives in our backyard just to give the bees a nice place to get their honey on. We don't need or want their honey, but giving them a refuge in our little corner of the world feels pretty rad. Loire hives are expensive AF. Anyway, thanks to Meredith. Go check her out on the Twittergram books and keep the conversation going on Twitter by joining me at Brendan O'Mara and at CNF Pod. If you dig audiograms and quote cards, and maybe even IGTV, woohoo, head over to Insta and follow at CNF Pod. Also email the show at creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Perhaps consider leaving a review on iTunes. What else? Oh yes, head over to BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, for show notes, and to subscribe to my monthly newsletter where I send out reading recommendations, cool essays, articles, and what you might have missed from the world of the podcast. I'm also in the midst of this 100-day project with my podcast Casualty of Words. It's a sub 3-minute show that gives you a shot of creativity in the arm every day for 100 days. I am 10 to 11 days into it, depending on when you listen to this. Anything else? I think that's it. That's enough. That is quite enough. So remember, if you can't do interviews, see ya.